The bet was simple. If Coach Elena could take down Jake Thompson, the undefeated state champion, the team would respect her coaching. If she couldn't, she'd resign. What they didn't know was that she'd never lost a match in her life. This story begins at Roosevelt High School in Columbus, Ohio, home to one of the state's most dominant wrestling programs. The wrestling room was a temple of tradition where champions were forged through blood, sweat, and uncompromising dedication to the sport. Elena Vasquez, 32 years old, had been hired as the new assistant wrestling coach 3 weeks earlier. Standing 5'6" with an athletic but unimposing build, she looked more like a fitness instructor than someone qualified to coach elite wrestlers. Head coach Robert Miller had brought Elena in specifically because of her extensive background, but he'd agreed to let her credentials speak for themselves. That plan was failing spectacularly. The team's unofficial leader was Jake Thompson, an 18-year-old senior who dominated the 220-pound weight class. Undefeated in 3 years of high school competition, Jake was headed to a Division I scholarship and carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd never experienced defeat on a wrestling mat. "I just don't understand what she's supposed to teach us," Jake muttered to his teammate Marcus during warm-ups, deliberately speaking loud enough for Elena to hear. "Coach Miller's been wrestling for 30 years. What's some yoga instructor gonna add to that?" Marcus Rodriguez, the 195-pound state runner-up, nodded in agreement. "Yesterday she tried explaining hip positioning like we're beginners. Lady, we've been wrestling since middle school." Tommy Chen, despite being only a sophomore, felt confident adding his voice to the criticism. "My dad says hiring female coaches for men's wrestling is just political correctness gone wrong. Different body mechanics, different strength patterns." Elena had absorbed 3 weeks of these conversations while trying to establish her authority through technical knowledge. Every suggestion was met with eye rolls, every correction dismissed as theoretical nonsense. The breaking point came during Thursday's practice when Elena attempted to demonstrate a counter technique. "Gentlemen, I want to show you a hip positioning adjustment that will make this takedown much more effective," Elena announced to the assembled team. Jake stopped his drilling and looked up with barely concealed irritation. "Coach Elena, with all due respect, my single leg has scored probably 100 takedowns this season. I think I've got it figured out." "I understand your success with the technique," Elena replied calmly, "but there's always room for improvement, especially when you face wrestlers with different defensive strategies." "Different strategies?" Jake's voice carried a mocking tone that made several teammates laugh. "Coach, I've faced every type of wrestler in this state. My technique works because I'm stronger and faster than my opponents." Elena felt the familiar tightness in her chest that preceded every significant challenge. She'd spent 3 weeks trying to earn respect through patience and knowledge. That approach wasn't working. "Jake, would you be willing to demonstrate the technique with me so the team can see the adjustment I'm suggesting?" The wrestling room went completely silent. Jake looked around at his teammates, all of whom were watching with anticipation. The idea of wrestling against their female coach was both unprecedented and deeply entertaining. "I don't want to hurt you, Coach," Jake said, his false concern barely hiding his amusement. "I appreciate the consideration," Elena replied, "but I think I can handle a controlled demonstration." Marcus stepped forward, sensing an opportunity to escalate the situation. "Actually, Coach Elena, maybe we should make this more interesting. You're always telling us about technique and strategy, but you've never shown us that you can actually wrestle." Tommy joined the conversation with teenage cruelty. "Yeah, if you can't even handle Jake's takedown, how can you teach us to defend against it?" Jake saw his moment and seized it with the ruthless confidence of an undefeated champion. "You know what? Let's settle this once and for all. Coach Elena, if you can take me down, actually take me down, not just show us some theory, then I'll admit that you might actually know what you're talking about." "And if I can't?" Elena asked, though she already knew where this was heading. "Then you admit that this job isn't for you," Jake replied with brutal directness. "No offense, but if you can't handle what we do every day, maybe you should find a different sport to coach." The challenge hung in the air like a blade. Elena looked around the room at faces that showed everything from curiosity to outright hostility. These young men genuinely believed they were about to witness her humiliation and subsequent resignation. Elena walked to the center of the mat, and something fundamental shifted in her demeanor. Her stance widened, her center of gravity lowered, and her hands assumed a position that spoke of elite-level competition. "Just to clarify the terms," Elena said, her voice carrying a new authority that made several wrestlers unconsciously step backward. "You're challenging me to a takedown. If I succeed, you'll respect my coaching and listen to my technical suggestions without mockery. That's right, Jake confirmed, though something in Elena's tone was making him slightly less confident than he'd been moments earlier. And you understand that once we engage, this becomes a real wrestling match until one of us achieves a takedown? Jake nodded, though he was beginning to realize that Elena's body language had completely transformed. She no longer looked like a fitness instructor trying to coach wrestlers. She looked like a predator preparing to hunt. The two opponents circled each other in the center of the mat. Jake moved with the confidence of someone who dominated every opponent he'd ever faced. But Elena's movement was different, fluid, economical, with the kind of subtle positioning that suggested an understanding of leverage and timing that went far beyond high school competition. Jake shot for his trademark single-leg takedown, the same technique that had overwhelmed countless opponents. What happened next took exactly 4.7 seconds. Elena's defense was perfect. She sprawled with textbook technique, used Jake's momentum against him, and executed a throw that sent all 220 pounds of him crashing to the mat, with Elena in perfect top position. The wrestling room erupted in stunned silence. Jake found himself flat on his back, completely controlled, staring up at a woman who had just dismantled his best technique with embarrassing ease. For the first time in 3 years, he was the one being dominated on a wrestling mat. 10 seconds, Marcus whispered, checking his watch in disbelief. Elena maintained her position for a moment, demonstrating complete control, then released Jake and stood up. Her breathing was steady, her composure unshaken, as if she'd just completed a routine warm-up exercise, rather than stunning the state's top wrestler. Jake slowly got to his feet, his face showing a mixture of shock, confusion, and the beginning of genuine respect. "Coach, how did you do that?" Elena looked around the room at faces that now showed something they'd never displayed before, genuine curiosity about her background and capabilities. "Jake, what I just showed you was a counter to the single-leg takedown that I've used successfully in international competition. The technique works because it uses your opponent's commitment against them while maintaining superior position and leverage." "International competition?" Tommy asked, his earlier mockery replaced by amazement. Elena walked to her gym bag and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her photos and held up the screen, showing herself standing on the top step of an Olympic podium with a gold medal around her neck. "I competed for the United States in women's wrestling for 8 years, Elena announced calmly. 2 Olympic gold medals, 3 world championship titles, and a career record of 127 wins, 0 losses. The revelation hit the room like a physical shockwave. Marcus stared at the phone screen, his mouth hanging open. "You're Elena Vasquez? The Elena Vasquez? The woman who dominated the 63-kilogram division for almost a decade?" Elena nodded. "I retired from competition 2 years ago and decided I wanted to give back to the sport by coaching the next generation of wrestlers." Jake, still processing his complete tactical defeat, found his voice. "Why didn't you tell us from the beginning? Why let us disrespect you for 3 weeks?" Elena's expression grew more serious. "Because I wanted to see if you could respect knowledge and expertise without needing to be intimidated by credentials. I wanted to know if you were mature enough to learn from someone based on the value of their instruction, not their ability to physically dominate you." The harsh truth of her words settled over the team like a weight. Coach Miller, who had been watching from the side of the room, stepped forward. "Gentlemen, meet your new head coach. I'm stepping down at the end of this season, and Elena will be taking over the program." Jake approached Elena with obvious shame in his expression. "Coach Vasquez, I owe you an enormous apology. We all do. We were completely out of line." "Apologies accepted," Elena replied. "But understand this. My Olympic medals don't make me automatically right about everything. They just mean I've been tested at the highest levels of this sport. If you disagree with my coaching methods, let's discuss it based on technique and results, not on assumptions about gender or physical capability." Marcus stepped forward. "Coach, could you show us the international techniques you used in competition? Real Olympic-level wrestling?" Elena smiled genuinely for the first time since arriving at Roosevelt High. "That's exactly what I've been trying to do for 3 weeks. Those positioning adjustments you dismissed, those are techniques I use to defeat the best wrestlers in the world. The strategic approaches you mocked, those are the methods that won Olympic gold medals." Over the next 2 hours, Elena demonstrated techniques and shared insights that these high school wrestlers had never imagined. But more valuable than the physical skills She taught them about the mental approach that separated good wrestlers from champions. Jake, who had been her harshest critic, became her most attentive student. Coach, when you're facing someone stronger than you, how do you maintain confidence instead of being intimidated? The transformation in the wrestling room was remarkable. Young men who had questioned her right to coach them were now absorbing her every word like sacred knowledge. That season, Roosevelt High School won their first state team championship in 15 years under Elena's guidance. Jake Thompson extended his undefeated streak and signed with a top university program, crediting his improved technique to Elena's coaching. More importantly, the program's culture changed completely. New wrestlers learned from day one that expertise came in many forms, and that the greatest champions were often those who combined physical skills with intellectual humility. Elena often reflected on that day when mockery became respect through action rather than words. She'd hidden her credentials to test their character, but when they demanded proof of her capabilities, she'd provided it in the most direct way possible. Sometimes the most important lessons aren't taught through lectures or demonstrations, but through moments when assumptions meet reality, and champions reveal themselves through performance that speaks louder than any resume ever could. Thanks for watching Hidden Valor. If this story inspired you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that expertise comes in unexpected forms, and that true champions earn respect through their actions, not their reputations. Let's keep celebrating the coaches and mentors who prove their worth through the success of those they guide.